Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Peter Falkai, President of the EPA, and today I'm glad to introduce the series of webinars, Help the Helpers. The conflict in Ukraine is having a tremendous impact on the mental health of the population and of those who are fleeing their home country. The EPA has expressed its concern and has put in place a solidarity network so concrete actions can be implemented to help persons directly affected by the war. One of these activities, a series of 3 webinars, has been organized by Professor Rojnic Kuzman. But before hearing from Professor Rojnic Kuzman and the webinar's chair, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Nataliya Maruta for a word of introduction. She is the president of the Association of Neurologists, Psychiatrists, and Neurologists of Ukraine. Nataliya, please.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's a great pleasure for me to participate in introduction of very important events of webinars, which is devoted to psychological trauma and approach for prevention and correction and treatment it. Unfortunately, this very interesting practical and scientific event connected with a war in my native country, in Ukraine. You know that our cities, our towns been bombed, that our people are killed, and our buildings are destroyed. And it is necessary to emphasize that not only military person, not only a military building been bombed by Russian army, but peaceful citizens, our population, our schools, our kindergartens, our hospitals, including mental health hospitals, too, been bombed in my country. In this difficult situation, our Association of Neurologists, Psychiatrists, and Narcologists do everything in our power to help our population, to help our patients, to help our people. And it is very important and helpful for us that our activity in contact, in cooperation with our colleagues from European Psychiatric Association. We have a lot of activities for patients, for their relatives, for refugees from Ukraine, for our psychiatrists. And this webinars is part of educational program with a network of solidarity with Ukraine. And it is very important and it's a great pleasure for me that our specialists, our psychiatrists from Ukraine take part in this webinar as a lecture. They are Professor Cheban and Professor Markova. We have experience in trauma correction, in trauma prevention, because war is in Ukraine start not on 24th of February this year, but earlier in 2014. That is why we try to present our experience in this webinar. In conclusion, I like to express our gratitude to EPA, to President of EPA, Professor Peter Falkai, for support us, for solidarity with us. and for all kind of activity with us and for standing with Ukraine. And for all participants, our webinars, I'd like to wish many success.
The first line help to refugees is given by volunteers who are not necessarily of psychological or medical background, yet they are expected to provide psychological first aid to refugees. Because of that and the emotional burden of working with persons who have just lost their homes or jobs or close one, they're also at risk of secondary traumatization. Because of that, these webinars are for them and for the mental health professional from their countries who would like to support them. The webinars will contain practical tips by experienced mental health professionals from the EPA who are experts in war trauma, but also comes from countries who had recent war events or ongoing war events. Therefore, we hope that these webinars will provide you very practical tips for your work. The first webinar will be provided by Professor Agata Szulc from Poland. Professor Szulc, could you tell us something about the first webinar?
The first webinar will be focusing on general information on trauma, triage and screening, and first aid psychological interventions. And these lectures will be provided by Professor Martina from Croatia and Professor Frank Padberg from Germany. A special lecture will be given by Professor Oleg Chaban from Ukraine, Kiev, on the experience in war trauma. And I would like to add that now we are having over 2 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and our colleagues, volunteers and mental health professionals are waiting for this information and how to help the helpers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Szulc. The second webinar will be chaired by Professor Geert, the EPA President-elect, together with Professor Nataliya Maruta from Ukraine. Professor Dom, could you tell us something about the second webinar?
Yes, of course, Martina, happy to do so. So our second webinar focuses on children, and Professor Sena Puowski from Croatia and Professor Peter Adriaanses from Belgium will provide some practical tips on how to deal with traumatized children and their families. And next, Professor Judith Balázs from Budapest will reflect on the current experience with children currently coming right now from Ukraine into Hungary. So already now, I thank everybody for participating in this essential webinar.
Thank you very much, Professor Dom. And the third webinar will be chaired by Professor Alma Dzubur Kulenovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Professor Peter Falkai from the EPA President. Professor Dzubur Kulenovic, could you introduce us to the third webinar?
Thank you, Martina, and thank you once again for organizing this education for our colleagues helping their survivors from Ukraine. Professor Falkai and I will be chairing the third and final webinar in this session, and that is Help to Helpers. Because training of helpers, the lay helpers and or not mental health professionals, will not be complete without giving them a clear and structured support in what they are doing and how they can provide self-help and help to other helpers. And we will get guidance on that from the experience of Professor Dolores Britvic from the University of Split in Zagreb. And the training on supervision and intervision will be provided by Thomas Ehring, Professor Thomas Ehring from Uni Munich. And there is something special about this aggression in Ukraine, and that is the role of the media, particularly social media, that is something new compared with our experience in the Balkans. And I expect, Professor Falkai and I expect a brilliant lecture by Ukraine's very own Professor Mariana Markova from Kharkiv on the role of media and the wounds that media can produce on the soul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kulenovic. We hope that this course will provide you practical tips how to help the others while also preserving your own health. The webinars will be available in English, but also they will be freely available at the EPA website in several languages. Hope to see you soon.